The replacement theology reading of the New Testament has led to the shedding of Jewish blood.
It's time for The Line of Fire with your host, biblical scholar and cultural commentator, Dr. Michael Brown. Your voice for moral sanity and spiritual clarity. Call 866-34-TRUTH to get on The Line of Fire. And now, here's your host, Dr. Michael Brown.
Welcome to the Line of Fire broadcast. Friends, this is going to be an eye-opening broadcast, an important broadcast, an in-depth broadcast. Share it with a friend, call a friend, text someone, click like, subscribe. Wherever you're watching, wherever you're listening, help get the word out. We're going to cover some really important material, and you can weigh in. If you happen to watch the debate last night with Gabe Finochio, you can call in 866-348-7884. That's 866-34-TRUTH. Any Jewish-related question I will get to a little later in the broadcast. Also, we are working hard now on the Frontline newsletter to go out early next week. And the Hebrew word study I just got transcribed from previous video of mine, working on that, the powerful message, great testimonies putting together for you. So make sure you're getting the Frontline newsletter. If you're not, it comes out once a month. Just go to thelineoffire.org. Do it now if you're not hearing from us regularly. Thelineoffire.org. Just click subscribe. So last night, I did a debate with a gentleman I just met recently. Some folks said he had a strong online presence in school and connected with him to do a debate. We had a very friendly, respectful call beforehand. Had I known that it was his first debate, had I known that he would conduct himself as he did, I certainly never would have done it. It got incredibly childish, even ridiculous at certain points. Nonetheless, we did cover a good amount of ground and expose the vast differences between our positions on whether the Jewish people are still chosen. Now, it was understood out of the gate from public statements I had made, understood out of the gate that it would not mean that every Jewish person is chosen to salvation, that those who are saved are chosen in the Messiah, or elect in the Messiah, but that the Jewish people were called as a witness nation, called for service, not guaranteeing their salvation, and that calling and election remained because God had given promises to the patriarchs. It's actually pretty basic in Scripture. It's reiterated through the Torah. It's reiterated through the prophets. It's reiterated in the words of Jesus and then Paul over and over and over again. So it's really pretty basic in terms of what the Word says on that, which is why I get a wide range of commentators. A Protestant background, I quoted Catholic. I'll quote the Catholic Study Bible in a moment. Wide range of commentators affirming this. And it's a position that's been held to for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and even going back to early church leaders, many of them still held to a view of a future restoration of the Jews, recognizing that there were promises that God made to Israel, that he kept his promises. Had nothing to do with dispensationalism, had nothing to do with some later, more recent belief. And bottom line, it's taught in Scripture, taught very, very plainly. Having said what I said, though, I'm glad we did the debate because it did expose a lot. It did lay out a lot. And it did show how if you come in with a certain style, if your style is to get clicks and likes, etc., or just draw attention through aggressive behavior, and you do that, it really does disqualify you from being taken seriously. More importantly, the issues we did discuss are pretty blatant. And I have to say I was shocked by the degree of an open replacement theology reading of biblical text. I mean, shockingly so. And I didn't research Gabe in advance. I knew my position. I knew there was nothing he could argue scripturally against it. So I was just curious to see where he came from. The fact that he quoted many church fathers, the fact that he quoted very texts that then led to, in later history, persecution of Jews and bloodshed of Jews, and Jews being ordered to be baptized or die, the history of anti-Semitism in church history, which Catholic scholars like Edward Flannery, or Protestant scholars like David Rausch, or Jewish scholars like Dan Cohen-Sherbach, or my own work, Our Hands Are Stained with Blood, all of them will say the same thing, that the teaching of replacement theology, the idea that the Gentile church had displaced Israel and God's purpose and plan, that is what opened the door to anti-Semitism in church history. And with that, the demonizing of the Jews and the Jewish faith, etc. You heard that on display last night. It's no wonder that through church history, this had led to persecution of the Jewish people. What I want to do today, though, is go through a number of texts. I've done this many, many times, and I wish I didn't have to do it again. I did it in depth at Our Hands Are Stained with Blood. I've done it in depth on other broadcasts when I responded to Jeff Durbin. It'd be great if Jeff and I could have a dialogue one day. I'm sure it would be on a very, very different tone and level than last night's debate. I'm scheduled, God willing, next year to have a major debate with Steve Gregg on these subjects. I trust the tone of that will be very different. That's supposed to be an extended one in California over like a one night, 1 day period. So I'm very glad to get into these with worthy opponents and to open up these subjects as brothers in the Lord in a respectful and honoring way before him and with one another, with the goal of the greater unity of the body as we learn from each other and learn to have our views challenged by one another without resorting to name calling and rhetoric and false accusations and actually blatant bearing false witness about people as happened against me last night. So again, I'm just recounting factually what everyone saw that watched the debate. In any case, what I want to do is break down some of these misreadings of Scripture once again. I've done it many times. I want to go through it once again to help you to clarify why these readings are completely rejected. I'm not going to repeat all the arguments I laid out, all the scriptures that I quoted, except to say that categorically God said in the Old Testament, because I made promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, I will never completely forsake the nation of Israel. I will discipline you in my anger. You'll be scattered among the nations, but I will preserve you and I will regather you because I've given you promises. And it's very clear. You say, does that mean there's two people of God? Well, there's promises to Israel remain. So they are the people of God often in disobedience. And then there are the people of God who are saved heavenly people, just like there's Abraham's physical seed and Abraham's spiritual seed. Yes, there's an earthly people of God that sometimes has been right with him and sometimes in wrong relationship with him, and right now is outside of his grace, having rejected Jesus the Messiah. And there is the spiritual people of God, Jew and Gentile together in one body, one ecclesia, one family, one congregation, one church. Amen. So that's, again, what Scripture says quite plainly and quite simply. In verse after verse after verse, reiterated in the Pentateuch. Even when God says in Leviticus 26, as we quoted last night, to the people of Israel, under judgment for breaking his covenant, over and again, he goes, even then I will not break the covenant promises I made. Because he made them unconditionally to Abraham, Isaac, and to Jacob. And then when you get on through the prophets, they reiterate it over and over. In the Psalms, God will not forsake his people. He will not utterly abandon his inheritance. And then Jesus speaking of the future restoration of Israel in different passages. And whenever he says Israel in the Gospels, look it up. It's only about a dozen times. Every time Yeshua speaks of Israel in the Gospels, every single time he's speaking of the physical nation, not a spiritual people. So even there is rejection, there is judgment, destruction of Jerusalem, scattering of the people, Paul's heart broken because his people are outside of Messiah now, which means lost without salvation. The promises remain. God has kept us. He has brought us back to the land, and he will one day save the nation. Paul is emphatic on that, reinforces that several times in Romans, etc. So before we go through a bunch of specific verses, let's just do this. This constant ridiculous accusation came up that everything I was talking about is a recent belief in the last 200 years. So, of course, he had to demonize Charles Spurgeon, had to demonize J.C. Ryle, Anglican bishops, this is both in the 1800s. He had to demonize everyone I quoted as holding to heretical beliefs. And it was, top New Testament scholar after New Testament scholar, leading Protestant scholars, highly respected evangelical scholars, Puritan scholars, even Catholic scholars. He had to say they all held heretical beliefs. But some of the quotes I didn't read, just for lack of time, among the Puritans. So Thomas Brightman, who was born in 1562 and died in 1607. What, shall they return to Jerusalem again? There is nothing more certain. The prophets do everywhere confirm it and beat upon it. John Owen died in 1683. They shall return to their own land. They shall enjoy it for a quiet and everlasting possession, their adversaries being destroyed, and they shall also be filled with the light and knowledge of the will and worship of God, so as to be a guide and blessing to the residue of the Gentiles who seek after the Lord, and perhaps shall be entrusted with great empire and rule in the world. The most of these are foretold concerning them, not only in their own prophetic writings, but also by the divine writers of sundry books of the New Testament. Increase Mather said this in 1669, the Israelites shall again possess the land promised unto their father Abraham, Robert Leighton died in 1684. They forget a main point for the church's glory, who pray not daily for the turning, the conversion of the Jews. Undoubtedly, that people of the Jews shall once more be commanded to arise and shine, and the return shall be the riches of the Gentiles, and that shall be a more glorious time than ever the church did yet behold. Matthew Henry died in 1714. The apostle proposes here in Romans 11:1 a plausible objection which might be urged against the divine conduct in casting off the Jewish nation. Hath God cast away his people? Is the rejection total and final? Are they all abandoned to wrath and ruin, and that eternal? Is the extent of the sentence so large as to be without reverse, or the contingence of it so as to be without repeal? Will he have no more a peculiar people to himself? In opposition to this, Paul shows that there was a great deal of goodness and mercy expressed along with the seeming severity. Particularly, he insists upon these three things. 1, that though some of the Jews were cast off, yet they were not also. 2, that though the body of the Jews were cast off, yet the Gentiles were taken in. And 3, that though the Jews were cast off at present, yet in God's due time they should be taken into his church again. On what basis? On the basis of the promises God gave to the patriarchs. D. Martin Lloyd-Jones, famous expository preacher, died in 1981 from Westminster Cathedral. It is remarkable that although they, the Jews, were without their country for so many centuries, and nations did their utmost to destroy them completely, this nation has been preserved. The only real explanation of this is that God has not finished with them, and that there is a day coming when this fullness of Israel is going to be brought back to salvation, and so God's ultimate promise to Abraham is going to receive a wonderful fulfillment. And the Catholic Study Bible says this, Romans 11:11-15. The unbelief of the Jews has paved the way for the preaching of the gospel to the Gentiles and for their easier acceptance of it outside the context of Jewish culture. Through his mission to the Gentiles, Paul also hopes to fill his fellow Jews with jealousy. Hence, he hastens to fill the entire Mediterranean world with the gospel. Once all the Gentile nations have heard the gospel, Israel as a whole is expected to embrace it. This will be tantamount to resurrection of the dead, that is, the reappearance of Jesus Christ with all of the believers at the end time. And as far as Romans 11:25-29, in God's design, Israel's unbelief is being used to grant the light of faith to the Gentiles. Meanwhile, Israel remains dear to God, still the object of special providence, the mystery of which will one day be revealed. The very point I made last night, and the scriptures make over and over and over. The Jews are still chosen with a mission, even if they are outside of Jesus and outside of salvation now. Their unfaithfulness, as Paul says in Romans 3, does not nullify the faithfulness of God. Hey friends, Michael Brown here. Many of you know about the radical health transformation in my own life. Starting August of 2014, went from 275 pounds to 180 pounds, less than 8 months, not by dieting, but by radical lifestyle transformation, getting rid of the bad, unhealthy things, eating only healthy foods. I've kept it up by God's grace now for 9 years, going from 3 headaches a week to no headaches in 9 years, blood pressure as high as 149 over 103, now maybe 105 over 70 on average. I mean, radical transformation. And I encourage you to look at your life, look at your diet, ask, are you going in the right direction, or do you need to make some changes? I also want to help you on a very practical level. I have added into my life as well some great supplements from our co-sponsor, Trivita. In fact, that's why we work with them, because I have personally benefited from these as well. I want to commend to you 3 in particular. Nitric oxide, which helps with blood flow, oxygen, energy level. MyoHealth, which helps with skeletal structure, muscle, which is really important as you get older, and Nopalea, which deals with chronic inflammation. And in fact, I've learned that that's the #1 killer worldwide, chronic inflammation. I take these 3 supplements every single day. As I travel around the world, I travel with these, and I want to encourage you strongly, check them out for yourselves. 800-771-5584. Get your free online health consultation. 800-771-5584. 5584 or go to trivita.com. Use the code BROWN25. You will get a 25% discount on your entire order, whatever size it is, and 100% of your first order will go to support the Line of Fire and more than a tithe of all subsequent orders. I use these. I commend them to you. 800-771-5584.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown. Get on The Line of Fire by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Shalom, shalom. Welcome to Thoroughly Jewish Thursday. Michael Brown, 866-34-TRUTH. It'll be a little while before I get to your call, so please be patient on hold. 866-34-TRUTH. So we heard last night, first, that Jewish people are not elect, not chosen, that God has gone back on his promises. Obviously, Gabe wouldn't say he went back on his promises, but of course, that's the explicit implication of that. But then we were told that a real Jew is not a physical Jew, but a spiritual Jew. And that real Israel is not physical Israel, but the church. So verses we've been through over and over and over again, Romans 2:29, Romans 9:6. Rather than go through every single verse, I'm going to allow you to jot these down, okay? And this way you can look this up for yourself, because we've been through it so many times, going through these very issues. If you just search on our YouTube channel, The Line of Fire on YouTube, or on our homepage, thelineoffire.org, just type in Durban, D-U-R-B-A-N, where I went through verse after verse after verse after verse after verse in the New Testament, citing every relevant verse from the Greek, then English, to clarify these things. But Paul is making a point dealing with Jewish boasting in Romans 2 and saying, really, the real Jew is one not just circumcised in the body, but also circumcised in the heart. That's the real Jew, the one who's a Jew on the inside rather than the outside. And then having said that, he continues to talk about Jews, meaning physical nation, the practitioners of the Jewish faith. So just jot this down, okay? In Romans, this is every time the word Jew occurs. Every time in the book of Romans, the word Jew occurs. Romans 1:16, so the gospel is the power of God for everyone who believes, Jew first, then the Greek. Romans 2:9 and Romans 2:10, where there'll be judgment on everyone who sins, first the Jew, then the Gentile, and blessing for everyone who does what's right, first the Jew, then the Gentile. Also jot these down, Romans 2:17, then Romans 2:28 and 29. Look them up for yourself, okay? 28 and 29. You'll see the exact same thing here. And in each case, 2:28 and 29, here he's talking about a real Jew in God's sight is the one who's a Jew on the inside, which some would argue means between two Jews, who's the real Jew, the one who's only circumcised outwardly, or the one who's circumcised outwardly and inwardly, or some would say he's making a point about a Gentile who honors God's laws. He's more of a Jew than the circumcised person who doesn't. Either way, he's using it in a special, unusual way, and then continues in the very next verse, Romans 3:1. Where he says, well, then what advantage is there in being a Jew or being circumcised, if that's the case? Then jot the verses down. Romans 3:9, Romans 3:29. Is God the God of the Jews only? Is not the God of the Gentiles, etc.? Romans 9:24, Romans 10:12. These are the rest of the times in the book of Romans that Paul refers to Jews. Every single time before and after the end of the second chapter, he's referring to a physical ethnic Jew, part of the people of Israel, or someone that came to be a follower of Judaism and converted into the religion, like a Ruth, and converted to the faith of Israel. That's what he's talking about every single time. So he makes a special point. Yeah, the ultimate Jew, the real Jew in God's sight is the one who's a Jew on the inside, not just on the outside. And he says, let me talk to you about Jews. The gospel is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes. First the Jew, then the Gentile. Romans 1:16, Romans 10:12. There's no difference between Jew and Gentile. The same Lord is Lord of all, richly calling all who call upon him. So all who call upon him for salvation. So the point is clear, emphatic, repeated. He's not saying that I'm not a Jew, or that a rabbi's not a Jew, that I'm a real Jew because I believe in Jesus, but a rabbi who doesn't believe in Jesus is not a Jew in God's sight. No, he is a Jew. He's not a Jew in the ultimate sense of having his heart circumcised as well through faith in the Messiah, but he's still a Jew, and that's who Paul talks about over and over and over. It's the exact same thing if we take the word Israel, okay? So let's go to Romans 9:6. Romans 9:6. Then we'll get the word Israel there in Greek, okay? And then we will search for the word Israel in the New Testament. Again, I've done whole broadcasts reading through every single relevant verse. But if we go to Romans, Israel is only found in chapters 9, 10, and 11, because there he is dealing with the ongoing promises to the nation and what happened. It seems like they failed. God gave promises to the nation, but then the nation didn't believe. So he says in Romans 9:6, not all Israel are Israel. In other words, there is a remnant within the nation, right? And that has always been the case. There's been a remnant that believe within the nation, and they receive the promises. But what about the rest of the people? So here's what you do. Do this little exercise. I've done it many times on the air. I have a whole chapter in Our Hands Are Stained with Blood doing it. But you do the exercise for yourself. I've got the Greek New Testament in front of me, and I go to Romans. So Romans 9:6, not all Israel is Israel. So there's a remnant. Not talking about the Gentiles there. He calls them Gentiles later. There's a remnant that believes within the nation. That's the Israel within Israel. But now he goes back to talking about the nation as a whole, the nation as a whole, the nation as a whole. Jot down the verses. Romans 9:27. Romans 9:27. Romans 9:31. Romans 10:19. Romans 10:21. Romans 11:2. 11:7. 11:25. And 11:26. And 25 and 26, he says, I do not want you to be ignorant of this mystery, brothers and sisters, lest you become conceited. The very warnings that really were not heard last night, it is this Gentile arrogance that Paul warned against. We are the new Israel. We have replaced them. God's done with those unbelievers. No, Paul says, don't be ignorant of the mystery. It's only a partial hardening that has come on Israel, meaning in every generation there's a remnant that believes, and in the end, the whole nation will turn by the grace of God. There'll be a turning of the hearts of the nation at the end of the age. So I do not want you to be ignorant of this mystery, brothers and sisters, so that you may not be conceited. That's what happened through church history, and God resists the proud, which is why so many things went wrong in church history. One was the severing of Jewish roots, the casting out of Jews who continued to follow Jesus and live like Jews, just like the believers did the book of Acts. Read Acts 21, where Paul demonstrates that he himself honored the Torah in the life of the Spirit, along with tens of thousands of Jewish believers in Jerusalem. And that's why Jacob, is written to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. And it says in James chapter 2, verse 2, if anyone comes into your synagogue in Greek, because that's where Jewish believers met. They continued to live as Jews in the light of the new covenant and by the Spirit. So I don't want you to be conceited. Israel has experienced a hardening in part until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in, and so all Israel will be saved, meaning a national turning, because God has given national promises. We continue to read, as it is written, the deliverer will come from Zion. He will turn godlessness away from Jacob. And what is the ongoing promise there? Why? Even though for the moment, Romans 11:28, they're enemies for your sake. So they're rejecting the gospel, being enemies of the gospel. They've rejected the gospel. That means it's now gone to you, the Gentiles. They are still loved. As far as election, the very thing we debated last night, as far as election is concerned, they're still loved on account of the fathers, because God gave promises to the fathers, for the gifts and calling of God are irrevocable. If I have time, I'll also read you what many commentators say about Romans 11:16, which says that if the root is holy, the branches are holy also, meaning that Israel remains set apart to God for a purpose. If the root, the patriarchs, are holy, is holy, that root, then also the branches are holy, meaning that the whole batch will ultimately be redeemed. A Jew who lives and dies today without Jesus is lost and will not be in the future redeemed. A Jew who lives in the past and rejected Jesus is lost, but there will be a national turning, and God's hand remains on the Jewish people. That's why we're still here. That's how we've been restored to the land. And that's why the future promises will be fulfilled, and Jesus will return to a Jewish Jerusalem. Hey friends, Michael Brown here. My delight to serve as your voice for moral sanity and spiritual clarity. We are living in such urgent times today, friends, that all of us are in the line of fire. There's a target on your back. There's a target on my back. If you simply seek to live by biblical values or just conservative moral values, you could be canceled. You could be cast out. You could be put down. You could be silenced. I'm here to say, friends, that I am not about to be silenced, and I don't believe you are either. It is time for us to stand up. It is time for us to say enough is enough. It is time for us to push back in Jesus' name. Not fighting the way the world fights. No, overcoming evil with good, overcoming hatred with love, overcoming the flesh with the power of the Spirit, overcoming lies with truth. And that's what we're here to do on the Line of Fire broadcast. And friends, it's not just a broadcast. It is a movement of people around the world. God's people standing up saying enough is enough and saying, Lord, here we are. Send us, use us. I want to urge you today to join our support team because we are on the front lines together. And we are literally touching people around the world, in America, in the nations, in Israel. And together with your help, we're going to amplify this voice and spread this movement around the globe. So I encourage you, go right now to thelineoffire.org, thelineoffire.org. Click Donate Monthly Support. Thelineoffire.org, click Donate Monthly Support. When you do, you become a torchbearer. We immediately send you 2 great life-changing books. We immediately give you access to many classes I've taught. Others have to pay to take those. You get them for free. Exclusive video, audio content, a new audio message every month, an insider prayer newsletter, 15% discount on our online bookstore, so much more. Join our support team today. Go to thelineoffire.org. Donate monthly.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown. Get on The Line of Fire by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Welcome to The Line of Fire on Thoroughly Jewish Thursday. Just a few more quick thoughts. Not to go back over all the details of the debate. It stands for itself. And again, it's unfortunate, the behavior that we had to deal with. And I pray and hope that in the future, the young man that I engaged will learn there are more things than sensationalism and outlandish statements and silliness if you want to be taken seriously. And I do hope that will happen in the days ahead. I was fascinated, though, by one replacement theology verse after another being read in the most blatant replacement theology method. For example, Revelation 2:9 and Revelation 3:9, where Jesus, speaking to the church of Smyrna and then of Philadelphia, speaks of those that claim to be Jews and are not, but are synagogue of Satan, and he'll make them bow down. One passage says that. So they're obviously opposing the gospel. So there are 2 ways of reading that. One, they were Gentiles claiming to be Jews, and they were not. They were some cult, some group claiming to be Jews, and they were not, and they were opposing them. Just like you have these cult groups today, like radical black Hebrew Israelites claiming to be Jews, and they're not, etc., or claiming real Jews are not Jews. So that's one possible way of reading it. Another way of reading it is that these were Jews who were hostile to the gospel, and by acting in this hostile way, God said, "You're not. You're a gathering place of the devil. You're acting like a synagogue of Satan. You're not real Jews." It would be like telling a man, yes, he's a biological male, he's a man, but if he's beating his wife and kids, you're not a man. You're not a man. So it could be a prophetic rebuke like that, and you have that. It'd be like me preaching to a congregation. You're not the church. You may show up on Sunday, but you're not the church if you're not living for God. Same kind of language. It's not saying that all Jews all over the world are considered the synagogue of Satan and are not really Jews. Go through the New Testament. Take the time And if you don't have something with software where you can look at the Greek, and if you don't have the ability to do that yourself, just go to any website, Bible Gateway or Bible Hub, and just search for a Jew. Put in Jew with an asterisk. That would mean Jews, Jewish, Jews. And just look at every time the word occurs in the New Testament, and you'll see that a couple times it may be used in a particular sense, like a Jew in a spiritual sense. Otherwise, every single time it refers to the people, the people, the people, the people, the people, the people, the people. There's no ambiguity. Do the same with Israel. You might find one or two verses where there's dispute, is it a spiritual meaning of Israel or not? Every other time, it's unambiguous. It's not a question. It's not a debatable issue. So you pull out one time, one verse where a verse is used a certain way and ignore every time it's used before that and every time it's used after that in the same book or by the same author. You can't do that. We don't have the right to misinterpret the Bible like that unless we are willingly promoting a false and dangerous agenda. John 8:44, where Jesus is talking to some Jews, they began to believe, but obviously they don't really believe in him, and they're rejecting him and claiming, hey, Abraham's our father. Well, he was. They were children of Abraham. The Bible doesn't dispute that they were descendants of Abraham. But now they're putting a spiritual, hey, I can boast in my lineage. And he says, your father is the devil because you're liars and you're murderers. And that's what the devil does. So it does not say that all Jews throughout the entire world are murderers and liars and are all children of the devil. And if you want to say, well, if you're not in Jesus, you're a child of the devil. Okay, that's everybody then. 1 John 5:19 says, we are of God, little children, and the whole world lies under the power of the evil one. So everyone who is outside of Jesus, you could say, lies under the power of the evil one or is a child of the devil. Doesn't matter who. So why not call every Gentile a child of the devil? Then it's level it out. Level out. 2 Corinthians 4:4, the God of this world, Satan, has blinded the minds of those who do not believe. So everyone, Jew and Gentile, outside of Jesus, is separated from God in that way. So it's the Jews are the children of the devil. No, if you want to be consistent, everyone outside of Jesus is a child of the devil needing salvation. If you want to be consistent in that regard. You know, even the quotation of Matthew 21:43, that the kingdom will be taken from you and given to a people bearing its fruit. It's not taken from Israel, taken from the Jews and given to the Gentiles. It says that the Pharisees and the religious leaders, they realized Jesus was talking about them in the parables, them. And they were afraid of the crowd. They were afraid of the crowds. Who? The Jewish crowds who thought Jesus was a prophet. So the Jewish crowds thought he was a prophet. The religious leaders were now being rebuked, and Jesus said, the kingdom's going to be taken from you and given to a people bearing its fruit. And who was it given to? The next lead, the Jewish apostles. It's not a matter of going from Israel to the Gentile world. It was a matter of transference from ungodly leaders within Israel to godly leaders within Israel. From there, then expanded to the rest of the world, where we have the whole ecclesia, Jew and Gentile, together as one. One last thing I want to do here. If I have time, I'll read some quotes about Romans 11:16, but I do want to get to your calls, and I appreciate you holding patiently. This demonization of Judaism. Well, it's antichrist and blasphemous. Okay, technically, Jews reject Jesus as the Messiah, unless you're a Messianic Jew or Jewish Christian. Technically, yes, you reject Jesus, and you could say in that sense you're antichrist. Okay, fine. You want to argue it like that? Fine. But here's the deal. A Jewish person reading Scripture, a Jewish person studying Torah, they don't see the hypostatic union of Christ in the Tanakh that they're reading. They don't see a lot of Christian dogma. What Jews saw through history is Christians living like the worst hypocrites, Christians persecuting them, mistreating them, driving them out of place after place, ordering them to wear the yellow star, live in ghettos. Christians did this. Church, professing Christians at least. They saw them themselves being vilified. At certain points in life, being given the choice of baptism or death. Now think of it. You're going to get baptized into an apostate church that has so much corruption in it. And you go to one of the church buildings, they have statues in there, which is completely anathema to a Jew. In their mind, they're being asked to follow idols. They haven't had a clear gospel presented to them, but a watered-down church traditional gospel that has departed way far from biblical roots. And in their mind, they would rather die in faithfulness to God of Israel than bow down to these Christian idols and these butchers who are giving them an option of baptism or death. And the fact of the matter is, if I just challenge anyone to do this, get a Jewish prayer book. It's not much to buy. A Jewish prayer book called the Siddur, and just read through the prayers. Read through it from beginning to end. See if there's a single mention of Jesus, a single mention of Christianity, a single bashing of Jesus. Just read it. Read it through. Read through the Mishnah, which is the foundational Jewish law code. Just buy a Mishnah or get online and see if you can read the Mishnah somewhere. And read through it. You can read it on Sfaria.org. Start with the Mishnah. Read through all of it and see how much Jesus bashing there is. Or spend the next 200 or 300 years going through the Talmud carefully, trying to really learn it and master it. And you'll find a few places where apparently Jesus is spoken against in very negative terms. We say apparently because they're different words, terms that were used. But you might find it, if you study for the next few hundred years, you might find a few references. The idea that it's this Antichrist, blasphemous religion, here's how the standard Jewish law code called Shulchan Aruch, which is foundational in Jewish study, in all circles of Jewish study. Listen to how it starts. So the psalmist said, I have set the Lord before me always, Psalm 16:8. This is a cardinal principle of the Torah and a fundamental principle of life among the pious who walk before the Lord. For the attitude, dealings, and conversation of a man when in the presence of a king are not the same as when he is in his own home among family and friends. How much more will a man be careful with his words and deeds if he but realize that the King of Kings, whose glory fills the whole earth, watches over him and observes his deeds, as it is written, if a man should hide himself in secret places, will I not see him, saith the Lord? Bearing this in mind, a man will require reverence for God, humility, and piety, and will be ashamed to do anything wrong. And I mean, on and on and on. If you study Jewish law, it's about ethics and conduct. Read the Siddur. You'll find it filled with beautiful prayers, many scriptural prayers. Some of the prayers sound like the Lord's Prayer. Or how about the poem Rock of Ages? Rock of Ages. Let me just see if I've got that here to read to you. Yeah, here we go. The prayer Adon Olam, Master of the Universe, and refers to God as our rock in the midst of it. Many Jews will recite this on their deathbed. This is the allegedly Antichrist blasphemous faith. Lord of the world, he reigned alone, while yet the universe was naught. When by his will all things were wrought, then first his sovereign name was known. This is an English translation, obviously. And when the all shall cease to be in dread lone splendor, he shall reign. He was, he is, he shall remain in glorious eternity. For he is one, no second shares his nature or his loneliness. Unending and beginningless, all strength is his, all sway he bears. He is the living God to save, my rock, while sorrow's toils endure, my banner and my stronghold sure, the cup of life whenever I crave. I place my soul within his palm, before I sleep is when I wake, and though my body I forsake, rest in the Lord in fearless calm. So a traditional Jew, in Paul's view, is zealous for God, but not according to knowledge. In Paul's view, you would say he is so near and yet so far. Do Jews need Jesus to be saved? Yes, 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 yes. Is there salvation outside of Jesus for a Jew or Gentile? No. Will a Jew who died in the past have another chance in the future? No. Categorically no, as I've said for almost 53 years in the Lord. Nonetheless, God's purposes remain. His promises to Israel remain. It is the only reason we are still here and have been preserved despite every attempt to wipe us out. And it is God who scattered us, God who preserved us, God who regathered us, and continues day by day to bring more and more Jewish people to him until the day will come when all Israel will be saved. Romans 11:26, the Israel that is hardened in part now, 11:25, is the Israel that will be saved in 11:26. For all those who say, well, this is just a dispensationalist interpretation, give it up. Give it up. I can quote scholar after scholar, as I did last night, non-dispensationalists, and go back hundreds and hundreds of years and find the exact same interpretation because the word is clear. And anything that takes all the promises, stack them up, all the promises God gave to the patriarchs and to Israel in the Old Testament, and says they no longer apply, or the stipulations have been changed, if they can just throw them out. No, don't throw out the promises, don't throw out the Old Testament, throw out the false theology and embrace what the word says, as Jesus will come back one day to a Jewish Jerusalem. I go straight to your calls. Straight to your calls. Hey friends, many of you know about the radical lifestyle change in my own life when I went from 275 to 180 pounds in less than 8 months. That was 9 years ago. It was a radical change in my diet and lifestyle, and I encourage all of you, put healthy eating, healthy living as a top priority in your life. We want to see a healthy you and a healthy church. There's no substitute for that, but let me tell you, there are some great supplements that can help you along the way, and these are supplements that I use daily. That's why I'm so excited to tell you about them so you can benefit as well. Right here as listeners to The Line of Fire. I'm talking about our friends at Trivita, Trivita.com. The number to call is 800-771-5584, 800-771-5584. On a daily basis, I take 3 Trivita supplements. One is nitric oxide, which helps with blood flow, oxygen, energy level. I've seen direct results in terms of my own energy, in terms of my own workouts and life. And then MyoHealth, especially important as you're getting older. Skeletal structure, muscle. I'm actually getting stronger now at the age of 68 with my workouts with the help of MyoHealth. And then Nopalea, which deals with chronic inflammation, which I learned since using this is the #1 cause of death in the world. This is putting money in the bank of your own health every single day. So you can get these supplements and others by calling Trivita at 800-771-5584. You'll get a 25% discount as a listener to The Line of Fire. And get this, 100% of your first order will be donated to The Line of Fire, and a tithe of all subsequent orders will be donated as well. You can also go to Trivita.com and use the code BROWN25. Let's get you healthy and...
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown. Get on The Line of Fire by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Welcome back to Thoroughly Jewish Thursday. All right, we go to the phones. BJ in Austin, Texas. Thanks for holding through the whole broadcast. Welcome to The Line of Fire.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for taking my call. Recently, I've heard in discussions on soteriology and original sin, somebody brought up Yetzer HaTov and Yetzer Hara, I think it is.
Yeah.
They were using the concepts to say that they don't necessarily agree with original sin, and they were using those Augustinian type, I guess, Reformed or Arminian Calvinist. They were using those concepts to say that's not the same thing in Judaism. They have like a good something and a bad something, and they can choose either one. There's no like corrupted nature necessarily. I just wondered if you could like.
Yeah. So what? Yeah, and you pronounced the words correctly. Well done. So Judaism believes in a good inclination and an evil inclination within every human being. So Yetzer is the word for inclination. So Yetzer HaTov is the good inclination. Yetzer Hara is the evil inclination. And based on, for example, Genesis, the 4th chapter, where God tells Cain that sin is lurking at the door, right? Its desire is for you, but you must conquer it. You must overcome it. That every human being, with God's help, can say no to sin. So while there would be within Judaism a recognition of the fallenness of human nature, in other words, that without God's mercy we're lost, and that we need his intervention in our lives. We can't just prop ourselves up fully and pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps, that it is not that every human being is hopelessly, eternally damned by an inherently sinful nature with no good in it. Rather, every human being has the potential of good or bad. And if you will cooperate with God, and for a Jew, it would be through study of Torah and obedience to his commands and prayer, etc., that you can actually not live a perfect life. You still need forgiveness and mercy. In other words, man's righteousness still falls far short of God's righteousness, but that there is the ability to say no to sin. So the way a Christian would say we have a new nature in Jesus, and while we still have a battle, we overcome, traditional Judaism would say, yes, you can overcome by means of Torah and God's commands and living a life with his help, praying, etc. So that would be a closer parallel. It would almost be like the new covenant mentality that we can overcome, but we're still in this world. But that is Jewish teaching, Yetzer HaTov, Yetzer Hara, that every human being has a good inclination and an evil inclination.
Yeah. I might call back after I ask some friends and stuff about it, see if there's further questions about it. But that sounds good for now.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
You bet. Glad to clarify. 866-34-TRUTH. Let us go to Elizabeth in Michigan. Thanks also for holding. Welcome to the Line of Fire.
Dr. Brown, thank you so much for taking my call. Dr. Brown, I have to give my deepest apologies from the debate last night from that young man. The lack of respect towards an elder person, the lack of respect to the Jewish people, the lack of respect of what happened. Dr. Brown, my prayer was that no Jewish person was listening to the debate yesterday, and correct me if I'm wrong. You did. I love the way you try to encourage him. You show him a lot of grace and mercy, and I thank you for that. But my deepest apologies on his part.
Well, Elizabeth, yeah, that's a very gracious thing for you to carry. You know, on a personal level, I was shocked rather than offended. I was shocked that anyone would be so blatant and bear such false witness and misrepresent other positions and behave like that. I was shocked. And again, if I knew that was coming, I wouldn't have done the debate. Having done it, I'm glad we did for the good of the audience. But yet that's the very kind of thing that a Jew could watch that and think, if that's Christianity, not just the behavior, but the misuse of Scripture. If that's Christianity, if that's what the New Testament teaches, I want nothing of this. Hopefully, though, if a Jewish person did watch that wasn't a believer, they did get to hear my side. They did get to hear what Scripture's reiterated, and yet repeatedly saying that Jews need Jesus, Yeshua, to be saved. The other thing is the gentleman I talked to on the phone that wanted to chat before the debate was quite a different individual than the one in the debate. And look, it was his first debate. I pray that he grows from it and learns from it. I hope he has some people around him that rather than encouraging that behavior are now taking this video and launching attack after attack, realizes that if you're going to be a Christian leader, you've got to show some fruit, show some self-control, be careful with your words, etc. So in that sense, it's a teachable moment. And I imagine, unless you are 1,000,000% in his camp, anyone watching the debate in the most slightly neutral way would be ashamed of the behavior on his end as well. But Elizabeth, it's so gracious of you to call. It's love like yours and prayers like yours that make a difference in touching my Jewish community. So thank you so much. You're very gracious. I appreciate it.
Dr. Brown, can I ask you one question, please?
Yes, go ahead.
About that, you kept repeating Jeremiah 31.
Yeah.
31.
Mm-hmm.
About he will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah.
Yeah, so first, just real quick, I pointed out that you say, well, Israel broke the Mosaic covenant, the Sinai covenant, so God rejected them. Now, what it says in Jeremiah 31, verses 31 to 34 is, you broke the covenant, so I'm going to make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. And then verses 35 to 37 say, no matter what you do, I'm still going to preserve you as a people. Yes, so go ahead.
Well, my question is that new covenant, it doesn't say, and for the Christians. I'm a Jewish believer in Yeshua, so that took me for a loop there.
Yeah, so it's
Can
made
you help me
it's
out?
made with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. So that's who it is established with. But because Jesus is the Messiah, now with his death, he opens things up for all. So he makes the covenant with Israel and Judah. And because Israel and Judah is called to be a light to the nations, to make God known to the nations, now this covenant through Jesus is opened up to all. That was the mystery that many Jews didn't see coming. And that's the glorious thing, that in Yeshua, Jew and Gentile become one. So it's made with the house of Israel, the house of Judah. You're 100% right. Yeshua establishes it at the Last Supper, then with his death on the cross, which is then, because he is the Messiah, he is the Savior of all people, through Israel is now mediated. It's the Jewish apostles that now take this new covenant and make it available to the Gentiles. Hey, thank you so much for the call and your graciousness. Much appreciated. Let us go to Seth in Atlanta. Welcome to the Line of Fire.
Hey, Dr. Brown, thank you for taking my call. I had a different question, but just in light of what your topic is, I was curious, are you comfortable with the language saying the new covenant replaces the old covenant? And then I'll get to my other question.
Yeah, yes. In other words, if the old covenant, you mean the Sinai covenant, the answer is yes. If you mean the Old Testament, the Old Testament scriptures, no, of course not. So some would argue that Chadash in Hebrew simply means renewed. It is the Sinai covenant renewed. So the Sinai covenant now written on the hearts of Jews first and then the whole world. So I differ with that. I'm happy to say that the new covenant replaces the Sinai covenant. Now, much of the content is the same, right? Love God with all your heart, love your neighbor. The fundamental commandments, the things that God gave Israel, of course, that would be the same. And then other things have changed because our sins are once and for all forgiven through the cross. So you wouldn't need, say, in the future, when all of Israel comes into this new covenant, you won't need a day of atonement. You won't need ultimate blood sacrifices and things like that for forgiveness and cleansing of our hearts and souls, because we have a new and better covenant that's replaced some of those things. So much of the Sinai covenant, the contents will be written on our hearts in the new covenant. But yes, the new covenant replaces the Sinai covenant.
Okay, it's good stimulating stuff. I come from what would be considered replacement, though I've never considered that, but I'm always open to reevaluating. I think your comments are very good and timely, and definitely giving me something to chew on. So thank you for your faithfulness to Scripture. But my main question is, in Isaiah 14, it talks about, the fallen day star, Lucifer, and then I think it's Ezekiel 22 or 28.
28.
Talks about,
yeah, tell you what,
yeah,
I'm going to jump in only because I'm about to run out of time. So Isaiah 14 mentions Hillel ben Shachar, which in the Vulgate becomes Lucifer, a light bearer, which then becomes the name for Satan. Isaiah 14 speaks about the king of Babylon, Ezekiel 28 about the king of Tyre, both of whom would have believed that they themselves were deities. God is now speaking to the demonic force behind them, ultimately Satan, and speaking of his fall. So he was once a guardian angel, an anointed cherub, a very, very high-level angelic being in God's kingdom. Pride entered his heart, and God drags him down. So the kings of Babylon and Tyre, Isaiah 14, Ezekiel 28, are being addressed. The demonic spirit, Satan, behind them is being called out. And his demise points to their demise. Blessings to you. Back with you. If you've got more questions, we'll take your calls tomorrow.